I felt completely and utterly destroyed. Because I felt like, where's the justice in this?
I had to keep all of the memories of the most devastating, humiliating thing that's ever happened to me fresh.
If it didn't happen, why would we put ourselves through this?
It's destroyed a big part of my faith in myself.
We're changing very slowly, very slowly.
Yes, it really is almost barbaric.
They told me that 99% of these cases go nowhere. You know, just be prepared for that.
Not so many years ago, the woman had to protest in the midst of the crime. And if you didn't make the protest, there was no rape.
A disturbing number of young people blame women for being raped.
I'm saying that the justice system and our society has so much catching up to do.
The Me Too movement has empowered a lot of women to come forward. Where it gets let down is you get to the court system and then you're slammed back down again.
Around 1 in 5 women in Australia is a victim survivor of sexual violence. However, that number should be treated as a lower end estimate because we know that sexual violence is underreported and under-recorded. Around 85% of survivors never report to police in the first place. For those survivors who do report to police, around 2/3 of those cases don't proceed any further. For the third that do go through, cases are dropped as they go through prosecution and to trial. For the small amount of cases that do go to court, only a minority of those result in a successful conviction, and those conviction rates are much lower than what we see for other types of criminal offences.
At about 1:30 in the morning, I woke to the sound of someone smashing on my front door, and I looked out the window and could see a co-worker. I told him repeatedly, please stop, you'll regret this, because I thought if I tell him he'll regret it that he might stop. I think he was at my house for a total of 9 minutes.
Predominantly, a rapist is actually someone that the person knows. It can be a friend, a relative, a neighbour, an acquaintance, and I guess the awful truth is it's someone that they trust.
I guess it was 10 years of physical and sexual abuse, family violence, and it was very severe for 9.5 years. The very first person I actually did speak to about it was my mother. She said to me, and I'm never going to forget it, it's your fault because you stayed for too long. Why do you stay? Why do you keep on going back?
The moment that a victim survivor first tells someone about their experience is really crucial in what happens next. So the research is really clear. If the response is a really negative one, that can prevent them from continuing to talk about their experience, wanting to report to the criminal justice system, and it can mean that they often internalise the experience and blame themselves.
Actually, when it happened to me, I spoke to a family friend who was a police officer and said what had happened. They said, look, unless you went to the doctor straight after and you've got evidence, you've got no hope. So I had that in my head for probably 14 years.
First one, I was raped at knife point in Woorolbark, and it was awful. A social worker said to me, just tell me what happened, and I started to talk to him, and he said to me, look, I don't really believe your story, you haven't got your facts straight. And I went, oh, okay. And that was it.
I went out for a night out with a few friends. We went out for dinner and some drinks. We had a little bit too much to drink, so we caught a taxi home. I did that because I thought it was the safest option. The taxi driver raped me out the front of my house. I definitely remember having absolutely no intention of telling anybody. Yeah, I was just so fortunate that each time I told people that response was one of belief and of support, and people were shocked and horrified that this could have happened. The fact that the rape that was committed against me was a stranger in a public place with evidence, which is not what happens for most people. The fact that my story was something that was historically easier to believe for people made it easier for me to go through the justice system.
A lot of people will not have any injuries as a result of the sexual assault or rape. People generally will protect themselves by maybe complying or freezing, and that's a normal element of the offending. A lot of our cases involve very few, sometimes no witnesses.
When I discussed this with some other advocate, they said you had to get a rape kit. Who gets a rape kit when they're in a relationship with somebody that they're living with? How am I supposed to prove 9.5 years of sexual assault and then they turn around and say, but he was your partner?
I was medicated for many years to try and, I basically just stopped my life. I stopped going out. I barely made it to work every day. I struggled with life. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine who became a member of the police force and said to her I'd never got over what had happened, and she said, you know, you should go and speak to someone. I met the most amazing detective. She believed my story. She did everything she possibly could to get enough evidence to take it further.
The difficulty with these sex cases is most sexual crimes invariably happen where there are only two parties involved. In the vast majority of these cases, it's just the evidence of the complainant. Injuries don't independently corroborate. There may be DNA, it may not be, but if there's DNA, it may be a case of consent, as opposed to it didn't happen. You can even say that maybe it did happen, but it just ain't proof beyond reasonable doubt. I'd think twice if it was my daughter, if there was no corroboration, if it was literally just her word and no other supporting evidence. I know, because of my experience with the system, the difficulties she would face.
I think it was really important to turn to the police and turn to the courts and say, I was the victim of a serious crime, you need to deal with this. The thing that was hardest was that I was put on trial, and I felt that the defence were able to insinuate that I was a liar. In fact, pretty boldly suggested at times that I was a liar. They were able to ask me about what I was wearing, ask me about how much I had to drink, not for the purpose of facts, but for the purpose of insinuating that I'm a particular sort of person, I'm a particular sort of woman. So at no point was he held accountable, at no point was he made to answer for his behaviour, and yet at every single point I was made to answer for his behaviour. I felt newly victimised. All of those traumatic reactions were all fresh all over again. Obviously, the idea of innocent until proven guilty is a really important part of justice and something that I fully believe in, but I think the legal system is so focused on that and so oriented towards that that it actually forgets about victims.
I was humiliated, tried to make out that I was a liar, exaggerator, his word against mine. He was portrayed as a great bloke, and I never got an opportunity to say anything about the sort of person I was and what this had done to my life.
Going through the criminal justice system, a survivor is stuck in this state of perpetual victimhood throughout a process that can often take years from start to end.
From the rape to the sentencing was just short of 4.5 years. I couldn't do any of the work of forgetting of healing, of putting what happened to me behind me, because I had to be able to relive it at any point in a trial. I had to keep all of the memories of the most devastating, humiliating thing that's ever happened to me fresh.
A lot of people don't realise the courage that a complainant has to take the step in the first place, then to actually give evidence about this, and then to have to wait. Yes, it really is almost barbaric.
He was obviously, after a 2-week trial, found not guilty. That was a shock, but the way that the laws are written, it is so difficult to prove consent. Up against each other in court, it's probably the worst way to try and prove this, but I don't see any other way that could possibly give either party a fair trial.
Over the past 20 years, we have seen some very substantial changes in terms of legislation for sexual offences and in terms of how police and other criminal justice personnel address and work with victim survivors in the justice system. Unfortunately, we know that that actually hasn't translated into successful outcomes for victim survivors in the court process.
It's not our law, but it's yours. And realising it belongs to the community is a bit of a responsibility. Everyone has to ensure that we not only obey it, but we actually understand it. And if we want to change it, that we do so through appropriate means.
We don't want to see people unfairly put on trial. So our system is a good system. It doesn't mean it's a perfect system. I think there is room to have a better system.
I was pretty distraught about it, but the other part of me thought, well, at least I gave it a go. And then I made him accountable, that I stood up there and said that was actually not okay.
There were so many times when I was tempted to give up, but I think what kept me going was the fact that I knew how privileged I was. I was really aware that very, very few people who've been the victim of rape actually ever reach the stage that I did. I hope that my daughter will never have to go through what I did. I hope that she will live in a world where we have a culture of consent that is the norm. Consent isn't something that you can assume. You either know you have consent, you ask, or you don't have it. So if you don't know that you have consent, you don't have consent, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. That's sexual violence. Until we have that kind of understanding in society, we won't be able to respond appropriately as a legal system.